So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's lecture of the ARWA Archaeology in Action series on the North Pontic. It gives me enormous pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Agathe Reingruber from the Freie University in Berlin, with whom I have co-organized this lecture series. Agathe was born in Brașov in Transylvania in Romania, where she attended German high school and benefited from the education provided by very dedicated teachers, especially in history classes. It was a tradition for the students to take part in the summer excavation school organized by the local museum, and this is where her interest in archaeology began. She started to study prehistory at the University of Heidelberg in 1992 with the late Professor Harold Hauptmann, where she delivered her master thesis on the Neolithic bone tools from Uçaçeşme in Turkey in northwestern Aegean. She completed her PhD in 2003 with a study on the pre-ceramic phase in the Aegean, using as a starting point the excavation of Argis Amagula in Thessaly, central Greece, carried out in the 1950s by Vladimir Milojicic. And she demonstrated that there is no such phase in Thessaly. In 2004, she joined as a research assistant the excavation of the Copper Age tale of Pietrile, carried out by the German Archaeological Institute. And in 2016, she became a research associate in the Institute of Prehistoric Archaeology of the Free University in Berlin, where she additionally gave courses on the Neolithic and Chalcolithic of Southeast Europe. She was appointed as a principal investigator for the project supported by the German Research Foundation entitled Prehistoric Thessaly, Mobile and Sedentary Communities South of Mount Olympus, carried out in collaboration with the Ephorate of Antiquities in Larissa in Thessaly. The project is dedicated to the investigation of the Neolithic and Chalcolithic of the region through intensive and systematic surveys. In her studies, Agathe puts together insights obtained from both areas, the Aegean and the Eastern Balkans, especially related to questions of relative and absolute chronology. In this respect, together with Lawrence Thyssen, she set up the 14C project, in which they collected the radiocarbon dates from Southeast Europe and Anatolia between 10,000 and 3,000 BC and synthesized them in a database that is freely available online under 14c.org. Agathe is a member of several organizations. Since 2002, of the European Association of Archaeologists, and in there, since 2000, she is one of the 3 editors of the series Themes in Contemporary Archaeology. Since 2007, she is listed as an expert in the Register of Archaeologists from Romania. Since 2013, she is a board member of the Transylvanian Studies Group, and since 2016, corresponding member of the German Archaeological Institute. With her publications, a monograph, 2 edited volumes, and nearly 70 papers, she's covering the areas between the Western Anatolia and the North Pontic region during both the Neolithic and the Chalcolithic. And today, the Northwest Pontic area between the Lower Danube and the Dniester River will be at the heart of her lecture. It is entitled Step by Step, Absolute and Relative Chronologies in the Northwest Pontic Neolithic. Agathe, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you very much, Biserka. Good afternoon, and thank you for your interest in my today's talk. And thank you, Biserka, not only for the friendly introduction, but also for inviting me to this very multifaceted and manifold lecture series. As Biserka has mentioned, my main interest is the study of the Neolithization in Southeast Europe and the Aegean. And due to the closeness to Anatolia and the Near East, the Aegean is the area in Europe where the sedentary lifestyle appeared first. As you know, in the Fertile Crescent, the Neolithic way of life started without the usage of pottery as a pre-pottery Neolithic, PPN, latest around 9600 BC. Pottery appeared first around 7000 BC in Anatolia, and only centuries later, around 6600 BC, did farming spread also into the Aegean. And from there, later on, around 6,200 into the Balkans. There is no doubt at all that many of the Neolithic innovations originate in the Fertile Crescent and Asia Minor, and were either directly brought by migrants to other parts of the so-called Old World, as some archaeologists think, or diffused through exchange and communication.
Agathe, I'm very sorry to interrupt you. Did you mean to show some slides? Or because you're still on the first slide?
You see the first slide only?
Yes.
I'm already stepped to the second slide.
Okay, try again then.
Okay, I go back to the first slide.
Yes.
And now I try again. What do you see?
I think the screen is frozen, so maybe you should just start to share again.
Agathe, it's not in the presentation mode. It's still in the view mode, with the slides on the side.
Okay.
You have to start the presentation.
I can only close it. I cannot. It started from my.
Okay, do escape. Do escape and then try again.
Okay. So now.
Now I can see. Now.
Okay.
But it's still on the presentation. So can you now start from the first slide?
Yes.
Okay.
I do.
Let's see.
And does there anything change?
No.
No.
Okay. Try again to be in presentation mode, because it's still with the. Maybe if you do F5. Yes, that's it. That's
it.
It's
okay.
It's working. Okay.
Yes.
It's not the right
now
mode.
You're on slide 2. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry for these technical problems. So what I was saying that these innovations of the Neolithic were brought either by migrants or, as some archaeologists think, to the Old World, or diffused through exchange and communication between mobile groups of people, as others argue. A question that concerns me for some time now is whether all Neolithic innovations reached Southeast Europe from the Near East. Take, for example, clay that came in use as working material already during the Gravettian, for example, in Dolní Věstonice, where it was used for figurines some 25,000 years ago. Clay is clearly not limited to the Neolithic and to farming communities, since also in the Far East it was very early, around 20,000 BC, used for ceramic containers. And also the pottery of the Steppe belt is of an earlier date than that of Western Asia, especially so the pottery from Western Siberia, but maybe less so the pottery from the North Pontic area. And we will see what the latest dates for the Western Pontic area are. In all these northern regions, the early pottery is not related to farmers, but to fishers and foragers, since these early pots were used for cooking mainly fish dishes. These two different spheres, pottery plus farming in the south versus pottery plus fishing in the north, to put it in very simple words, are closest to each other, east and west of the Black Sea. My today's main question is whether the groups of people from these two regions were indeed separated, not only geographically, but also culturally, or if communication and exchange happened. Theoretically, exchanges may have occurred on both sides of the Black Sea, while in the eastern Black Sea regions, deep mountains, the Caucasus, may have acted as a natural barrier. This is not the case in the West Pontic area. And in the next 50 minutes or so, I will refer to this western string, the westernmost reaches of the Eurasian steppe belt. Pottery and C14 dates will play a major role in my lecture, because my conviction is that we need a viable chronological scheme before we can discuss issues of social and cultural change. So here are the steps to be taken during my talk. First, some words on the environment, both on climate and vegetation of today and of the early 20th century and its reconstruction by drillings. Followed by some words on the history of prehistoric research, which is in this part of the world inseparable from the political history of the 20th century, And then the main topic of the lecture will be the chronology, first absolute and then relative chronology, and based on them, some concluding remarks. The western end of the steppe belt is indeed a manifold region covering 3 different climatic zones, 6, 7, and 10, highlighted here in blue, and another 2 transitional zones, 6 to 7 and 6 to 4. That means in total 5 different zones according to Bohn and colleagues in their contribution from 2004. On closer observation, there are few areas on this map that have such a diverse climate in such a small area, apart from the region of the Eastern Black Sea. And this diversity affects, of course, also the vegetation cover. On the right, a vegetation map with a rough outline of the steppe belt in yellow color. And here's a more detailed map by Bohn again, on the western steppe area with the different habitats. Our area of concern is located between the Lower Danube, east of the River Olt, and the southern Buch River. And now in parentheses, I do apologize if my spelling is not always correct, but I try to follow up the Ukrainian pronunciation with Buch instead of Buk and Dniester instead of Dniester. I hope I can keep it up. So in this area, we have the following habitats. L1, the subcontinental meadow steppes, alternating with oak forests. L2, submediterranean, subcontinental lowland. M2, the herb grasses and steppes, and M3, the real grass steppes. So it is especially this area that deserves much more attention. Of course, this map reflects only the today's situation that we cannot just apply to prehistory. Especially in the last century, many transformations through drainage and big engineering earthworks have been undertaken. But when we have a look at a map that has been published 100 years ago in 1923, the original vegetation cover is much better characterized. And I was so happy when I discovered this map that I immediately put some color on it for a better visualization. So before the human interventions, steppes in yellow, steppe-like areas in green, and marshes in blue spread along the Danube area, also west of the River Olt. Also, this historical map from 1955 shows, for example, in this particular section of the Danube, a water-rich habitat before the systematic drainage of the 1960s took place. The dots on this map refer to prehistoric sites that sit along the riverbanks and the lakes formed by the Danube. Geographers from the University of Frankfurt, Jürgen Wunderlich and Dirk Nowacki, have been able to reconstruct the prehistoric landscape here that was covered by a larger lake fed by the river Danube. Additionally, according to the archaeologist Norbert Bienecke, at the site of Pietrele, wild animals were hunted that prefer exactly these 2 habitats: wild pig, the floodplain forest, and horse and aurochs, the open grasslands of the steppe. The vegetation map from 1923 shows similarities between the Lower Danube area, also with the Lower Körös, Mureș, and Tisa rivers. And this area played a major role in the history of research. Pottery sequences from here have been used to describe the pottery inventories in the Pontic region as well. And in my view, this has led to some misunderstandings that affect our way of interpreting ceramics assemblages until this very day. And therefore, we have to dive now a bit into the history of research and the political history of the mid-20th century. During the Second World War, Romania's territory expanded into the east, including Moldavia and Transnistria. Yet between 1941 and 1944, the northern part of Transylvania belonged to Hungary, with cities like Nagyvárad, Oradea in Romanian, and Kolozsvár, Cluj-Napoca, like also the lower reaches of the rivers Körös, Kriș in Romanian, Maros, Mureș in Romanian. This area was investigated by the Hungarian archaeologist János Banner, who published in 1942 his book on the prehistory of the Tisza-Maros-Körös area before the Bronze Age. Only 2 years later, Ida Bognár-Kucian presented her PhD on the Körös culture. And in the same year, 1944, Vladimir Milojicic finished his dissertation on the early Neolithic in Serbia, establishing the 4 periods of the Starčevo culture. And in 1949, he published his influential book on chronology. So both the Kurdish and the statual cultures of the Carpathian Basin and the Central Balkans were defined before the end of the war. After the war, Romania had to cede its eastern territories to the Soviet Union and received northern Transylvania back from Hungary. The first steps in prehistoric research in post-war Romania were taken by Ion Nestor, born in Focșani in Romanian Moldova, and with a doctorate obtained in Marburg in 1932. In 1951, he conducted excavations at the site of Glăvănești Vechi, north of Iași, where he discovered sherds with decoration exclusively in the negative, with impressions and incisions. Fritz Schachermayer proposed in 1955, cautiously and with a question mark, to name that material Glăvănești, to include it into a Glăvănești group, and dated it just before the Cucutanean culture. I should maybe add here that in a footnote, he thanked Milorcic, who was at that time the best connoisseur of statual Kurdish materials, for his advice. But this intervention by a foreign scientist was obviously not to the acceptance of Romanian archaeologists from Moldova, like Mircea Petrescu-Dâmbovița, or Wallachia, like Vladimir Dumitrescu. Their critique from 1958 was unexpectedly harsh, reinforcing the official view according to which the whole territory of modern Romania formed, since Neolithic times, an inseparable unity. It was only Gheorghe Lazarovic from Cluj who tried to avoid or at least ameliorate this state-imposed position. He chose to label this pottery culture as Stacevo Criș IV, written by him in quotation marks, in order to differentiate it from the proper chronological phase Criș IV. This phenomenon, according to him, would not be part of the Stacevo Criș culture, but no other name was needed. Unfortunately, his quotation marks from 1979 were lost in later publications, especially so after Silvia Marinescu-Bârcu stressed the official position in 1981, according to which the Criș culture spread not only throughout Romania, but also in Soviet Moldavia. This claim was in strong contradiction to the view from the East, namely back in 1974, Vsevolod Markevic published his study on the Buchnester culture on the Moldavian territory. After 1991, an international spirit prevailed in research, with excavations and subsequent publications conducted in joint teams, for example, together with Andrew Sherratt. As claimed by Marinescu-Bârcu, the label Criș culture was widely applied, but not for the sites from the Dniester Valley. In Romanian terminologies nowadays, not only Criș, but indeed Stacevo Criș is used for the culture's name. But note that in the contribution by Ilie and colleagues in the lower left corner, the names of two rivers are mentioned first, Siret and Prut. And this system to label cultures after rivers is applied especially in those areas where stratified settlement mounds or tells have not developed, like it is in the case of the Northern Pontic. Additionally, many important regional studies have been published in Ukraine, of which I mention only shortly those by Nadia Kotova, Dmytro Kiosak, and Dmytro Haskevich. Comprehensive over-regional monographies and edited volumes tend to be in the meantime a bit outdated, being published some 14 years ago, but still I learned a lot from these, especially so from the volume edited by Jordan and Zvelebil that I can warmly recommend. In their contribution to that volume, Doluchanov et al. Published a map showing the main cultures of the area, Buchnester and linear pottery culture, or LBK. No mention is made of the Criș culture here. This is also the case on a more recent map from 2019. But now, traditional national borders are not important anymore for the assignment to a specific culture. Sites located on the right, the Moldavian riverbank, are considered to form an own group, that of the Soroki, in Romanian, Soroka. The sites from this map, published by Haskevich, provide some radiocarbon dates. All these dates and many more you can find also in the database mentioned by Biserka in the introduction. In a project from 2017, we have gathered together with Lawrence Thyssen radiocarbon dates available from the different regions of Southeast and East Europe and Anatolia, hence the acronym CEA. We analyzed and commented on them and standardized available information in a database, here a screenshot with dates from the Steppe region. From a total of 3,026 dates, 177 are from the Neolithic of the Northwest Pontic area. Unfortunately, some of these dates are of poor quality with huge standard deviations up to 230 years, and often the dated material is not indicated. Related to the material, the main problem is that from the steppe region, there are no short-lived species like grains available for dating. Additionally, there are no stratified sequences given since no tells have formed there, and some sites are like palimpsests of different archaeological events that appear more or less in the same level. Therefore, adjustments are necessary in order to find the best interpretations possible, both by the excavators in the field and later on by colleagues working with these dates. The main materials dated are pottery, carbon, and animal bones. Both are not without risk, especially so in the case of conventional dating, like in the Kiev laboratory, where a high amount of material is needed. For example, 700 grams of bone for one date only. For the bones, the exact animal species are only seldom mentioned, and the collagen content is never given. If it is below 1%, the result is not reliable. In the case of pottery carbon, a contamination with the clay matrix and therefore with the geological signal of the clay is easily possible, and this may distort the result, especially so in the case of pottery tempered with shell. Also, charcoal must be treated with care, especially when high amounts are needed for conventional dating, like 40 grams of dry charcoal. Apart from the danger of mixed samples, wood species are not indicated, and therefore the old wood effect may be at play. The dating of shells also poses the problem of the inherent reservoir effect, and when dating antler, one must be aware that it may have been shed many years before the death of the animal and has just been collected by the prehistoric persons from the ground. Also, the archaeological information is poor, both related to context, provenance, and the archaeological level. With these dates, no Bayesian modeling is possible. So in this talk, I will use only the calibrated values in the 1 sigma range, of which I preferably use the median values. This result is a rather rough picture, a snapshot that can and must be changed by future investigations. 11 dates from the western Ukrainian coastal steppe are dating the Mesolithic there between 7,570 and 5,950 according to their medians, and 59 dates belong to the Buchnister culture between 6,600 and 4,500 BC. Of these, 9 dates have huge standard deviations higher than 120 years BP, which are excluded from the analysis. So we are left with 50 dates. Even if only sorted according to their ages, still some tendencies are demonstrable. The oldest 18 dates from the north are from the north, the forest steppe, and are predating 6000 BC. The younger 32 dates are mainly from the south, the coastal steppe, and are post-dating 6000 BC. 6 dates are from sites located at the transition between forest and coastal steppe and are much later, after 5200, and thus already coeval with the LBK and Tripilia A. There are a handful of dates also from this time, and they corroborate what I said before. The dates on pottery carbon from Kiev are much too old in comparison to the dates obtained on animal bones at the laboratory in Bern. These dates were recently published by Dimitri Okyosak and his co-authors. A possible solution to this problem of very high dates for the Buchnister culture from the Kiev laboratory was suggested by Dmitry Ohaskevich and his colleagues from Tokyo. They submitted to the laboratory there shirts from the site of Baskiv Ostrov, with organic temper to be AMS dated. And this method requires only a few milligrams of material. On one shore, the cooking crust was preserved in its interior that was also dated. The results are very precise with standard deviations below 35 years BP, but still not without uncertainties, as indicated on the upper graph. And on the lower one, their cultural affiliation is illustrated. In the upper graph, white are the samples with a very low CO2 content, and these two dates are presumably too old. Especially so the date at 6500 BC. The gray and black dates are okay from a technical viewpoint, but then these are sorted to their pottery culture. But when these are sorted to their pottery culture, one can see ambiguities. The second date on the graph is obviously too old for this group. So after all, we are left with only one reliable date for this older group. The other three dates are much younger, coeval with the LBK around 5300, 4900. And as you can see, also dating the charred residues from the preserved crust may be problematic because usually fish was cooked in such pots subjected to the reservoir effect that may distort the desired result by up to 700 years. The discrepancy here is of 300 years. So in short, all these dates are in one way or the other problematic, but indeed a certain tendency is observable with a group of older dates in orange, followed by a group of younger dates in blue. When contrasting these dates obtained on pottery carbon to those obtained on animal bones from the same site, obtained at Kiev, the results at first seem to be quite different. There is this consistent block of dates in red here between 6300 and 6000, a bit younger than the problematic date on pottery carbon in the lower graph. The second group with the two dates around 5600, 5500 do in fact correspond well with the youngest date from the orange group in the lower graph. But the situation is a bit more complicated. Haskevich, for example, doubts all the results obtained at the Kiev laboratory, not only those on pottery carbon, but also those on animal bones. I would not go so far. Given the consistency of this group of dates obtained on animal bones, other than that on the pottery carbon, in my interpretation, the dates obtained on bones are a bit more reliable. I assume with due caution that they are dating the context with pottery inventories of non-farming communities of the so-called para-Neolithic or sub-Neolithic or ceramic Mesolithic at earliest 6200, 6000 BC. And the later phase can be attributed to 5600, 5500. I would therefore suggest a small adjustment to these dates accordingly. In this sense, I do rather agree with the chronology presented by Kiosaget and colleagues with the para-Neolithic of the Buchniester culture starting in the area around 6200. They juxtapose with it the Krish culture of the Lower Danube area. What I miss in this table is the area between the Ukraine and southern Romania. Namely, I miss the evidence from the Prut-Sirev interfluve of the Republic of Moldova and Romanian Moldova. This missing part is shown here with dark broken outlines. The white dots are sites of the early Neolithic, Stachevo Krish 1-2 and Karanovo 1-2, with white painted pottery from the southern Balkans and the Carpathian Basin. The easternmost side of the Krish 1 culture is that of Magura and closest to our study area. There is no time now to illustrate the material culture of the Stachevo Krish proper, but in order to have a comparison in your mind, I would like to shortly show the results of the modeled sequences of C14 dates from this site. It starts around 6000 BC, although no separate mention is made of the phase Krish 2, the earliest group should correspond to both Krish 1 and 2. Phase Krish 3 covers the time 5750, 5650. Phase 4 is missing completely, and the gap must be acknowledged here between 5650 and 5500. The sequence continues with dates assigned to Zuddesh and Vedastra cultures at 5500, which is quite early. Part of this area, mainly the Romanian Moldova between the rivers Siret and Prut, has recently been the topic of a comprehensive study by Ilie and colleagues of 2022. The authors have gathered all the evidence available from the area and presented a very useful catalogue with all the sites shown on their map. The earliest sites, blue dots, appear north of Iași. These are Călinești, known from surface investigations only, and Lunca Poiana, a salt extraction site with 14 sea dates of the early Neolithic according to Weller and Dumitroaia. But note that these dates correspond to the whole duration of the Krish culture and not only to the final stages of 3A and 3B as indicated here. The yellow dots clearly prevail in the north around Iași and Clăvănești Vechi, with the exception of Trestiana, number 186, with the green, while the green dots represent the latest phase, Krish 4, that occurs throughout the area. In fact, the calibrated dates of the two sites, Trestiana and Negrilești, with their medians indicated here in blue, although sorted to different phases, do not differ. Those from Negrilești are just as old, if not even a bit older. Apart from Zakharovka, the sites from the Republic of Moldova are only generally given as Starcevo Krish. No mention is made of the northern sites near the Dniester River. Of these northern sites, 4 yielded radiocarbon dates, namely Tătăruca 9, 15, Soroca 2, 3, and 5. When looking at these dates, the situation is rather dismaying. Also in this case, I decided to only calibrate the dates according to their ages and try to point out this way a possible duration of the early Neolithic. But the good news is that these dates were run at different laboratories, not in Kiev, and that only in one case, from Tătăruca 9, 15, highlighted in red, pottery carbon was dated. And there is only one date with a very high standard deviation at 120. Looking separately at the dates from the Dniester River of the Soroca group of the Bucht-Dniester culture and those from farther south in the Republic of Moldova, in the upper right corner, there is a tendency observable that the northern dates are a bit older. The two youngest dates, after 4700, are overlapping with those of the Precucuten culture, the Romanian variant of Tripilia A, a situation similar to the Bulgaria, where para-Neolithic groups are prevailing over centuries, even after the LBK started. In the Romanian part of Moldova, the Neolithic dates are of slightly better quality. Of the 9 dates from the salt production site at Poiana Slatinei, only the youngest one can be related to the so-called Krish culture phases 3-4 at 5600, 5400. The other dates from Poiana in fact lack a cultural affiliation and may be attributed to Mesolithic or Para-Neolithic or early Neolithic groups, coeval in fact with the Soroca group of the Bucht-Dniester culture at 6000, 5500 BC. 4 dates are from settlements. We have shown them before, Negrilești and Trestiana, and they were attributed to phases Krish 3 and 4 between 5580 and 5360 BC according to the medians. These fact results of radiocarbon dates, together with the problematic assignment of pottery styles, most of them stemming from surface collections, led Ilie and colleagues to argue that Negrilești illustrates the southward progression of the Neolithic front. I myself do not see a front here, but only some disparate sites covering several hundreds of years. When looking at their medians, they rather indicate a patchwork than a front, with indeed a tendency of older dates in the north, but not exclusively, like for example Zakharovka or Soroca 3 with younger dates. Yet such a north-south gradient makes indeed sense when including into the discussion also the coastal steppe area. There in the coastal steppe of Dobroja, the Neolithic Hamangia culture appeared late, probably only during the 5th millennium, but this is based on 6 C14 dates only at 4900, 4400 BC. And this situation is similar to the coastal steppe of Ukraine, with a later appearance of the Neolithic life way of life there than in the forest steppe. Additionally, there are hints that here, in the coastal areas, the Mesolithic may have prevailed longer than in the hinterland. At this point, one has to at least shortly mention the formation of the Black Sea. The complicated transgression and regression episodes are the topic of many different studies. I tried to put this information together in a table, and it seems that this long process started at the very latest around 7500 BC, when the connection with the global ocean occurred, can be regarded as completed around 6000 BC, when the saturation of the salinity can be dated. Interestingly, there are no coastal sites before this date. And also in the whole of eastern and northeastern Bulgaria, no earlier sites than 6000 BC have as yet been detected, none from the Turkish coast as well. This unstable environment may have been favorable before 6000 BC for mobile Mesolithic groups, but for sedentary Neolithic communities only after 6000 BC. So now with this knowledge in mind, we can have a quick look at the pottery styles. You remember the radiocarbon dated pots from the site of Baskiv Ostrov of the para-Neolithic Buchnister culture in western Ukraine, with impressions and incisions and rounded bases. Also west of the Dniester, in the Republic of Moldova, such pots were found in Zakharovka, decorated exclusively in the negative with incisions and impressions. Yet here, the inventory was separated according to decoration style into 3 pottery groups. And I use here the original labels from the 1991 publication. Those with broad incisions and herringbone designs were assigned to the Buchnister culture. Those with impressions and plastic decorations are included into the Krish group, and the nicely burnished ones are considered to represent Protovincia elements. As no painted decoration occurred, Dergachev and his colleagues were suggesting that during migration waves, the painting was lost in this area. This was a quotation. If a single radiocarbon date is of any meaning, then the assemblage should be dating to the mid-6th millennium BC. Also in Negrilezhd, such a combination of decoration styles was discerned, with broad incisions in zigzags, impressions, and fine wear with carinated profiles. Some of these may have been covered with a red slip. Exceptionally is the occurrence of the polychrome paint, a style of the final early Neolithic that appears only in the southern sides of Romania and Moldova. Generally, the sherds from Negrilezhd are well comparable to those from Glăvănești Vechi. And similarities can be found also with the typical sherds of the Buchnister culture, especially the fact that the decoration in the negative is a rule and not the exception is a fundamental characteristic for all these inventories. So the pottery of the Outer Carpathian area is mostly unpainted and decorated mainly with incisions in zigzags, ripples, impressions, and channeling. This is the reason why Schachermayer, supported by Milorčić, suggested to apply a different name and not Križ or even Stačevo Križ. In my view, an opportunity has been missed here, namely to perceive the area of the Outer Carpathians as a cultural unit with its own characteristics. Pottery is not seen as a set of complementary styles forming an original inventory, but separated into distinctive groups. Yet not the exception, color and paint should be the defining element, but rather the rule, impressed and incised decorations. Usually new pottery styles are readily used to demonstrate repeated waves of migrations from mainly the south, for example, Ursulescu 1984, and equated with the penetration of a group of population, in the words of Nadia Kotova. One such style, the Com impression, were recently linked by her and co-authors to the Aegean and Mediterranean area, tracing this kind of decoration back to the Levant, crossing Cyprus, Rhodes, touching Euboea, and then crossing Thrace and the Black Sea. Yet the result is a vessel of the steppe kind with decorations of the steppe kind. In my opinion, one does not have to rush the prehistoric people around the old world, because for the appearance of new pottery styles, also other explanations can be thought of. For example, the fusions of innovations or of fashions. But in this case, I'm afraid that neither people, nor pots, nor ideas have traveled. Together with two colleagues known for their specializations on Anatolian and Aegean pottery, Lilibonga and Laurent Tissens, we have shown that the oldest impressed pottery in the Aegean is not from Anatolia, but from Macedonia at circa 6400 BC, followed by northeast Thessaly before 6100. The comb decoration in question is strikingly different from that in the north. It may therefore be a matter of convergence if different comb-like tools were used in very distant regions on pot of very different shape, temper, decoration, and function. Ultimately, we should stop equalizing pots with people. To conclude, for the time being, the radiocarbon dates can provide only momentary snapshots to which in the future more and better data must be added. The way I have interpreted the scanned data in this talk confirms on the one hand the view presented by Elie and colleagues of a north-south gradient for the pottery styles. Indeed, the oldest pottery sites in the steppe area are those of the forest steppe, starting probably after 6200 BC. But we have seen what the pitfalls are, both regarding the animal bones and especially the pottery carbon. Coeval with them, or a bit younger, are the dates of the Soroka group near the Dniester. Also, the Krish sites in Romania and Moldova are a bit younger. Around 5900 BC, based on dates obtained on bone material, first sites were founded in the coastal steppe. And finally, sedentary communities can be dated in the coastal steppe of Dobroja, latest to the 4th millennium BC. Yet also another gradient, a south-north gradient, must be also thought of. Agricultural practices, farming and herding, are related to the Krish and Karanovo 1-2 cultures and not to the Buch-Dniester area. And the dates from Magura, for example, are much older than those from the West Pontic sites. Farming and cultural practices related to it had its origin in southeast Anatolia. There is no evidence for domesticated plants and animals in the Dniester area until later in the 6th millennium. But when it comes to pottery styles, similarities between the western and the northwestern Pontic steppe regions must be acknowledged. A decrease of dates from north to south is feasible despite the difficulties related to them. So let's reverse the perspective and turn the viewpoint, and with it the map, upside down. The vast area and communication corridor provided by the steppe belt may have facilitated early on, long before the Bronze Age, and according to Haskevich, already in the Mesolithic, exchange between communities living at its western end. So in the end, the main aim of my talk was to conceive of this area as not only a receiver, but also as a transmitter of innovations in both directions. The area between the Prut and the Danube is a heritage treasure that has not yet been properly explored. This area could add to a better understanding of Neolithization processes also in other parts of the world. Because, as relative and absolute chronologies indicate, communities of the late Mesolithic, pottery Mesolithic, or Para-Neolithic, and early Neolithic may have been interacting here over several centuries. Thank you for your patience and for your attention.